Good morning. Continuing the review and summary of Hemshech Ayin Beis, we are now on volume 3, page 1456. Closer to the bottom of the page. Okay. What are we learning? We're learning about how the soul's descent below, meaning within each one of us in our bodies, engaging with an animal soul, and of course with the physical world, is a tremendous yirida. It's a great descent from a very high level to a very low level. The soul retains its divine personality throughout, but it can get concealed. It gets concealed. Not could get, it gets concealed, as we learned. And in the process of understanding this, he began to explain the verse, Shcher ani v'nova. I am dark, but beautiful. He said this is a statement that neshamas make, the neshamas below, that are manifesting inside of a body. They are saying this, they're speaking, it's a dialogue, a conversation they're having with the soul as it is above, which is called B'nai Yerushalayim. I should have said, the whole verse is Shcher ani v'nova, B'nai Yerushalayim. Daughters of Jerusalem know that I am dark, but beautiful. So who's speaking? The neshama below is saying to B'nai Yerushalayim, the neshama above, I am dark but beautiful. Dark means darkened by the concealment, like he said, due to the concealment of the godly energy, the godly Hashem and Kedushasei, as I come down below here. So to explain this, he began first explaining what is Yerushalayim, Malchus of Atzilus. Yerushalayim is complete reverence, complete bittul, telekus. And that's only in Atzilus like that. Once you get into Beriya, you could have bittul, but it's more bittul hayesh, what he called lower levels of bittul. So the malachim and the creations don't have that level of bittul. And he compared it to different. And the same thing with neshamas. The neshamas, as they are in Atzilus, are b'nai Yerushalayim. And therefore they have that level of bittul. And he compared, he said, primarily because they're in a state of gestation, like pregnancy, ibur, like a child in its mother's womb. So it assumes its mother's personality, because it's part, like he said, uber yerachime, it's a limb and an organ, it's part of the mother. And it eats what the mother eats. And ruchnius, that means the neshama is being sustained by its mother, which is Atzilus, and the energy of Atzilus. Then there's later, the birth of the soul is when it comes into Beriya, and now it's already disconnected from the mother. It's now an entity of its own. It's still a child of that mother, obviously, and it is a neshama. But that's what it means, is distant from the kav. Because it's now already separated itself from the kav, the main divine energy that manifests in Atzilus. So next paragraph, what we learned next was, so to understand this, let's understand the difference between Atzilus and Beriya. And he says that the difference between Atzilus and Beriya is divided by a partition, a parsa, a mosach, a curtain or partition. So the kav that we talked about, that radiates in Atzilus, but up to the curtain. Then there it stops. And even that which comes through the curtain is only a reflection of a reflection. It's very diffused, and it's called a ha'ara nivdelis, like a separate reflection, as if it took a leap. There's a shift that happened. It's not just the continuing flow of the air that may get a little diminished, gets more diminished as it goes down, but there's also a curtain here. Remember, the air itself also gets diminished, but here's a curtain, obviously a spiritual curtain, a spiritual filter, if you wish, or partition, that causes it to be separate and become a no identity, and that's why in Atzilus is bittul b'tachlis. There, everything there is completely subsumed by godliness. But in Beriya, there's already a separate entity. It still has bittul, but it's not the bittul of Atzilus. And also the part of the that pierces the curtain, kiyasa pasa, which is called Atzilus within Beriya, which he said with the kelim of Malchus that become Nefesh Ruach Neshama Biy'a. So it has more Elokus because it's Atzilus and Beriya, and they have the Hakav within them. B'kol Mokim, it's not like the Kav and Atzilus. And he explained because the kelim of Atzilus, as they go into Biy'a, they become more abundant, and the energy becomes more diminished. That's what we discussed, and we explained that the more you go down, more kelim, the more expression you need. Like a beginner student needs a lot more kelim and less oir. A higher level student doesn't need that many kelim, doesn't need that many examples, and they'll call it to contain the idea. Okay, that's where we stop. But he's going to continue to discuss what is the difference between Atzilus and Beriya, because that's key here. To understand how the neshama gets darkened as it comes down below, and how it's and why it's speaking to the daughters of Yerushalayim, Bnei Yerushalayim, the neshama above, we have to understand the difference between their spiritual quality, and there's a major difference between them. Now, just for the record, this is Atzilus the Pratis, the microcosm, but the same idea is Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum is also called Atzilus the Klolos, a macrocosm. And there it's called a Tzimtzum. Here it's called a Parsa, or a Mosach, a partition or a curtain. There it's called a Tzimtzum. But the similar idea, obviously there it's much higher, because the Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum altogether there's no room for existence. Here we're talking about after the Tzimtzum, there's the Kav, the creation of Atzilus, or the formation of Atzilus, the existence of Atzilus and Beriya. But I just wanted to point that out, that earlier we did learn the same idea as Atzilus the Klolos and Beriya the Klolos, which would be Ak. Similar idea, because in the bigger picture of Ayin Beis, we discussed yesterday, ultimately the theme is that even after it comes down and is separate, becomes like a newborn child, separate from its mother. The goal is through our Avedas to reconnect and experience pre-Parsa Atzilus consciousness and pre-Tzimtzum consciousness. All that's part of the process, but we're not there yet. Right now we're talking about the process of creation, of how it comes to be. First we have to be separate before we connect. So now he's going to continue another difference between Atzilus and Beriya. So we're on the line that begins on Miyat Ha'er. It's 10 lines from the bottom of page 1456. And we continue, and you can follow the pages if you want to see the text at ayinbeis.com. It says, V'gam yesh b'zeh hefresh. There's also a difference between Atzilus and Biy'a. The Atzilus ha'er b'chol esas sfiris k'shem b'skarlus v'sachdus. That in Atzilus, the Eir and all the energy, the divine energy in all the 10 spheres are in a, 1 second. They're in a state of hiskalulus, interconnectivity, and hisachdus, and united. In other words, there are 10 spheres, but it's very apparent there how it's all working, we'll call it in a very a healthy and balanced way. Everything is coordinated with each other in the ultimate fashion. You know, think of like a newborn child. A healthy child, everything is working perfectly, humming along. As we get older, and the so-called appliance of the body begins to wear down, things don't always work as smoothly. Circulation is not as well, the breathing not as well. I mean, many things become, because either we get filled with toxins or there are different blockages and so on. I'm not even talking about illness, just in general. Like they say, you see a newborn child, you see the chest heaving up and down because they're using 100% of their lungs. Adults use, I believe I read somewhere, 60 or 70% of our lungs. That's why when you take a very deep breath in, you'll often cough. Obviously, athletes and others that condition themselves probably bring that a number up. But the point is that the Atzilus, just as an example, Atzilus, the Eris and Kalim, and what he says, the Esses Firis are Biskalulus, that's interconnectivity. That means they're all very much interconnected and coordinated, Vesachdus, and united. Mashenkin, Kishinimshachin Biy'a, When it comes down to Biy'a, a shift happens. Protis. Now the focus is a lot more on the details, not on their connectivity and how they work with each other, but each specific detail. So you don't quite have that. Just to give an example, I'm going to give an example. You read, let's say you read Ayin Beis, you're learning Ayin Beis, or for that matter, lahavdil, any book or any idea. So someone who's reading it for the first time, or a beginner, the main focus is the details. Someone who's read it and really experienced it properly sees the big picture. You have to read a whole book to know what's the big picture. And the focus then is on the big story, the big narrative, not so much on the details. Obviously, the details are part of that narrative. But what are you looking at? Are you looking at like the bird's eye view, the big picture, or you're looking at the specifics? Give an example. When Moshe Rabbeinu told Bezalel to build a Mishkan, so we know he told him, first build the Kalim, and then build the structure. And Bezalel says to Moshe, that's not the way of the world. First you build the structure, then you bring in the Kalim, the furniture. You don't first bring furniture and build a house around it. You first have a house, and then you deliver the furniture, you build the furniture. And Moshe said, you're right, that's the way you should do it. So the obvious question is, so what, Moshe didn't understand that? So the answer, one of the answers Chassidus gives, brilliant answer, Moshe was a visionary. Bezalel was a builder. The visionary focuses on what is the purpose of the Mishkan. Purpose of the Mishkan, not the walls. The walls you need because you need enclosure, you need to contain. The purpose of the Mishkan is the Aron. According to the Ramban, the Aron is the central keli where the luchas are, the Torah is, and the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies, the Ark. According to the Rambam, is the Mizbeach, the Karbonis. But it's all about the Avodah in the Mishkan. It's not just putting a structure up. It's you build a shul to daven and to learn. A Beis HaKnesses is Beis HaMedrash. But you need a structure to where to do it. Bezalel was an architect. He was a builder. He's talking about how to practically build it. Obviously, you build the structure first. So Moshe was coming from the point of view of the big picture, like in Atzilus. Bezalel would be more in Beriya. Now, how do we actually build it? You're going to go to a contractor, and the contractor is going to just focus on the vision. You're not going to get yourself a good structure. You're going to just have a nice dream, a nice concept. You need someone. You need the electrician should focus on the electricity, and the plumber on the plumbing, and the carpenters on the carpentry, etc. Just as an example. So in Atzilus, what dominates is the vision, is the divine vision. That's why it's Iskalus and Isachtus. In Biy'a, the focus is more on the protim, Chachma, Bina, Das. Now again, this doesn't mean Atzilus there are no details. Just a question: what is the main focus or the main perspective? Valderech Sha'amar, and he gives an example. Akol be'asar shchinta sharya. So this is a Maimon Chazal. Wherever there are 10, the Shechina resides. This is, of course, a statement when we talk about a minyan, a quorum of 10 people. Something happens when 10 people come together. Shchinta sharya. The Afa Pishagam be'echad yesh asurash hashchina. Now we know every individual also has the Shechina within him. Every person is a neshama. So what does it mean that Dafka 10, what happens when there's 10 together and not one individual? What's added? So he says, Afal Pi, Shagam be'echad yesh asurash hashchina k'mish shekasav v'shechanti b'seicham b'seich kol echad ve'achas. It says clearly, v'shechanti b'seichem, and the expression is that God, I will reside, I will dwell in each one of you. That means the Shekhinah is in each individual. Because every individual is a part of God. Is a part of God. Like he explains in Tanya, chapter 2. So what does it mean, Dafka 10 Shechinta Sharia? Achzeu derech prat. When you talk about an individual, you're talking about derech prat. You're talking about a specific individual, like he says, that you're getting the Eir Eliki that fits that particular piece. that spark of that soul alone. The Shekhinah is resting in that person. The Gamshu Tzadi Gomer. And even when he's a Tzadi Gomer, which means he's a high level neshama. The Yochid B'Deireh. And he's a singular person in all of the generation, like a leader, like a Rebbe, like a Moshe Rabbeinu. Kenishmas Moshe, like the neshama of Moshe. So Agam Shaya Neshama Klolis, though he was a Neshama Klolis, like we know, he was a collective soul that encompassed all the souls within him. Nevertheless, Makol Mokim, Hula Atzme Yochidhu. When you speak about him as an individual, he was an individual. Like the Rebbe would often emphasize that Moshe cannot make a minyan. He needs 9 other people. 9 tzaddikim is not a minyan. Or even one tzaddik for sure not. So he's a yochid. B'kol mokim b'asora dafke. What something changes when there's 10. Shechina shoyre. The Shechina then rests not just on an individual. The Shechina now manifests in a collective way. Why? Mishum de b'asora dafke. Because 10, specifically the number 10. Shem neged esser spheres Atzilus, which correspond to the 10 spheres of Atzilus, B'tzir kema shlema, in the full, complete structure, in the kema shlema, sham sheida klolos ere en sof sheba esser spheres. The Atzilus, the iyu v'chayu ichad. There now you're getting not just the individual, the Shekhinah as it's tailored or focused on one individual, you're getting the overall, you can call the synergy of Ein Sof, the Klolos Ein Sof in all the spheres where of Atzilus, where Iyu v'chayu echad, he is one with his Eir. Basically getting a more collective manifestation experience of godliness. Which would also come to explain actually what is the chiddush of the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash to V'shrechanti b'seichem. Today, yes, the Shekhinah is in each one of us. But the Beis Hamikdash, the Shekhinah rests and it becomes a close. That's why it's a chiddush. You could say, what do we need to have a Mishkan or a Beis Hamikdash for? If there's a Shekhinah in each one of them. Because there, like we learned in the Torah, that the Shekhinah rested this week's Parsha actually. We're going to read this week that when the cloud descended, the Shekhinah rested in the Mishkan. Moshe went in and spoke to Hashem in a very revealed way. That is more than just the Shekhinah in each one of us. And this isn't just a quantity thing, it's a quality thing. Like I said, synergy. I don't know if he's going to say it. Oh, he's going to say, yeah. He's going to talk to Eira El Al Kulona. You'll soon see in a moment what is the difference. I'll just give a quick introduction. When you take, let's say, 4 letters, Hebrew letters, Chassidus usually gives the example of Baruch. What does Baruch mean? A blessing. It's made up of Beis, Reish, Vav, Chaf. Each letter is a holy letter. It's one of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. It's a holy letter. But a Beis and a Reish and a Vav and Chaf that are not brought together, each of them has a certain measure of holiness that fits that letter. They come together. What do you have? You have more than the sum of the parts. It's not just 4 letters came together. They turn into a word called Baruch. It has a whole new meaning. You're manifesting bracha, blessing. That's the collective energy. What he's going to call Eira El Al Kolona, like a synergy that's more than the sum of the parts. That's the example he's giving. So that's the difference. In Atzilus, what dominates is the Klolos, is the Shechina Shruya, like he's saying that over all the 10 spheres. In Biy'a, it's the Shechina in each particular individual level. Ukamai came by spheres the Atzilus. He's now applying it to what we learned. Gufa. In the spheres of Atzilus itself, that we just talked about, the 10, the Atzilus, who kola esser spheres b'sachdus. All the 10 spheres are united, they all sense they're part of one larger whole. Meir komakim b'spheres Atzilus gufa. The Atzilus, who kola spheres b'sachdus, meir behem etzem ha'er. So the etzem, the very core energy, radiates there, because they're all in this seamless, united state. V'yesh shleimer, the Rebbe Rashab is adding, and you can say, Shezeu b'chinas ha'era el al kulona, shenizbar le'il. So we learned about this all the way in the beginning of Ayin Beis, chapter 27. He spoke ha'oila al kolona, which means when you bring together a bunch of details, there's a new energy that enters that's more than the sum of the parts. Like I just gave the example of Baruch. Same as with anything like that. Another example is the Gemara in Seita. Talks about the Meraglim. They came back with these very heavy, large fruits from Israel. So the Gemara talks in detail, how did they carry these heavy fruits? They were very heavy. So it talks about how many people you needed to carry one clump of grapes or apples or whatever is the different fruits that they brought back. So the Gemara says something interesting. It says two people carry something, they can lift something that's more than the sum of the parts. Meaning, one person, let's say, can lift 100 pounds. Another person can lift 100 pounds. Together, you'd think they can only lift 200 pounds. No, they can lift something like 210 pounds. There's some collective energy when you have two people together. And if it's three people, it's more than 3 times. And it grows exponentially depending on how many individuals. So what do you see from that? That there's the parts, but there's something that's added when you bring parts together. There's something more, like when you say, for example, a human body. So we're made up of 248 limbs, organs, and we have 365 sinews or nerves or whatever, however you translate it. But if they're separate, you don't have a human life. When they come together in one human being in a healthy way, it's more than just I'm made up of a composite of 248 limbs. It's a human being. There's something additional that's added that when you have the whole collective. So in Atzilus, that vision that I was describing unites everything. All the 10 spheres are under the influence and under the aura, you could say, the glow of the divine, the unity of Elikus. In Beriya, the focus is on this individual more. Because you need that, because you want to create individuality and you want to break it down into details. So what did we say earlier? El kolona, shenizbar le'il, shezeu be'eses spheres gnuzis. There it was discussed that the el kolona is the 10 hidden spheres. Shesham kol eses spheres hein b'isachdus mamish. There all the 10 spheres are mamish b'isachdus because they're not even revealed yet. Mashenkin kishenim spheres achas protis. The next page, 1457. Whereas when they start becoming individual spheres, they now become, the focus is on the specifics. So there is tak eses spheres agnuzis, but then he continues that Atzilus is similar, even though it's revealed spheres, but compared to Biy'a, they're like all united as one entity. This also explains the mila of Achdus. When people are united, you say, Borchenu Avinu Kolonu Ke'echad, that we're all as one, our Father blesses us. The Frierdiker Rebbe gives an example when a father sees his children are celebrating together and are love each other and are united, he wants to be there with them. If he sees them arguing and divisive, he doesn't want to be there. The Shekhinah doesn't want to be in a place where there's no unity. That's why Sinas Chinam destroyed the Beis Hamikdash by Sheni. Why? What does the unity do? Because the unity takes away the individualistic part and turns them into one full entity. Not that they lose their individuality, but what's focused on is the synergy among them. And that's a keli for the Shekhinah. So in Atzilus, that's the case. In Biy'a, it starts becoming more separate entities. Not to say Biy'a is divisive. That's not what he's saying. They're just becoming more discernible. The details are becoming more defined. And we need that because Hashem wants a dir b'tachtenim. He wants a world where we initially don't sense that all-pervasive unity, and we bring the divine unity into this world. So there's a purpose for Beriya. But nevertheless, we have to distinguish between the unity of Atzilus and the unity of the details in Biy'a. Now there's more, he's going to say much more about this, but I'll stop here because I read a little piece, quite a section, if anybody wants to ask anything. It's not over. There's going to be more details on all of this. Any questions? Okay. So let's continue. We're on top of 1457. V'nizbar le'il, and we learned earlier, and I'm referring to, I cite here, page 1448. The Atzilus kol es heim ba'achdus mamish. Then the Atzilus, all the 10 spheres are utterly united. Dugmas b'chinas ha'akudim. We learned there, it's like the akudim. Even though akudim is 10 energies in one container, but Atzilus has an element of that, because even though it's 10 energies in 10 containers, but again, the seamlessness and the coordinate and the unity is what dominates. Al Kain. Therefore, be'esas spheres the Atzilus, in the 10 spheres of Atzilus, meir behem oir elyon levad, levad b'chinas ha'oir ha'mislabish b'teicham. So that's the oir el al kolona. That addition to the oir of chachma within chachma, the oir of bina within the keli of bina. You have also an oir elyon that's like an all-encompassing, a synergetic, transcendent oir. Like we said before, like the oir el al kolona, that's more than the sum of the parts. In addition, besides the oir in each particular section or each particular part of Atzilus. That's an Atzilus. Now, ukeshakelim de malchus nimshachim b'Biy'a, when these containers of malchus of Atzilus are transmitted and now travel into Biy'a, shezeo madregas protis, which is now more specific, the specific levels is what's the main focus. Like I gave the example with Betzalel, his job, the contractor, the architect has to, and the builder has to build each detail on its own. He can't just be thinking about the whole picture. He has to deal. So then, this collective energy we just talked about, like the energy of Baruch, the word bracha, not the energy in Beis, in the Reish, in the Vav, and the Chaf. So in Atzilus, you have both. You have the energy in each specific element, plus the collective energy. In Biy'a, the focus is more, so you don't have that collective energy as much, or you don't have that, you have the specific energy in each specific element. V'nizbar le'il, it was explained earlier, shezel b'chinas siluk u'miyut. Not sure what this means. Does he mean that's the difference between Atzilus and Biy'a, that Atzilus, Biy'a is siluk and Atzilus is miyut? I don't think so. I think he means to say that what happens, the oir, el al kon, that collective oir, now is in a state of siluk, like removed and miyut and diminished. But I have to look up where this nizbar le'il is. I'm not sure. So let's leave that be for now. I'll get back once I do a little research. Again, any questions before I continue? Ukamoy kain yuvon b'neshamas. Now he's going to go back. Remember, all this is coming to explain the difference in the soul in Atzilus, b'nei Yerushalayim, with the shlemus hayir, the complete reverence and bittul, and neshama as it comes into Biy'a. So he says, "Ukamoy kain yuvon b'neshamas, kamoy sheyodu b'Biy'a." And the same thing we'll understand with the souls when they come down into Biy'a. Gam b'chinas Atzilus sheb'Biy'a. Even the level of Atzilus in Biy'a, like we said there or earlier, is not quite like Atzilus and Atzilus. So what's the story? Ein ze be'erech k'may she'en b'Atzilus atzmei. You cannot. It's not comparable, not commensurate to the way the neshamas are in Atzilus itself. B'yesem klulim b'chinas pnimis hakelim demalchus. When these neshamas were encompassed, like the ibur, like the child in its mother's womb, was encompassed in the inner containers of malchus. Shemeir behem eira kav mamish kameshu b'Atzilus. We're there, the eira kav, like we said, the child eats from the mother eats. So the kelim and malchus of Atzilus are sustained by the Eir HaKav, by the main power line, like it is in Atzilus. So you can't compare how the neshamas are in Biy'a, even the Atzilus within Biy'a. V'gam b'chinas ha'er shebechlolos ha'sesfiras Atzilus, in addition to the second point that he made. Not just that it's getting directly from that line, the kav, but also that Eir, Elal Kolona, that collective Eir in all the 10 spheres of Atzilus, that's dafka the way it's in Atzilus. Mashenkin kishiyardu lebiyah, but when the neshama, by contrast, when it comes down to Biy'a, shegam b'chinas Atzilus shebabiyah ena Eir kamei b'Atzilus. Even in the level of Atzilus within Biy'a, the Eir is not the way it's in Atzilus. Canal, as we discussed earlier. So number one, it doesn't have the direct link to the kav. Now it's meruchakim, like he said. It's separate. It's separated. It's like a leap. And secondly, it doesn't have the collective energy, that big picture energy that we talked about, that synergetic energy. So there you have the distinction of the neshamas in Atzilus, neshamas in Biy'a. Well, let's continue. V'yadua, and he continues to develop this now. And it's known, the beprotius, when you break it down further, yesh neshamas da Atzilus mamish. There are mamish, there are neshamas of Atzilus that even when they come into Biy'a, they retain their Atzilus personality. So he's now going to break it down even further. Because you would think from this that maybe all neshamas, once they leave Atzilus and go into Biy'a, so in Atzilus they're utterly connected, but in Biy'a they're starting to become separate. So he says no. In neshamas itself there are different types of neshamas. There are neshamas of Atzilus v'gam kamoi shenimshchu b'Biy'a, and even these neshamas of Atzilus, even when they go into Biy'a, means they travel downward. Hein b'bchinas Atzilus mamish. They're not affected. They don't assume and retain the properties of Biy'a. They go through Biy'a because they're coming down to this world, but they remain Atzilus, neshamas of Atzilus mamish u'kamoi, and he gives examples. Nishmas Moshe va'avos, like the soul of Moshe and the patriarchs, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Va'ayim asher kosev b'lekutei Torah ba'abir d'seis osis. Tells us to look at Lekutei Torah and the explanation of seis osis. There he says that when Moshe spoke to Parei Mitzrayim in Egypt, it was Atzilus in Asiyah. So Moshe did not become part of Asiyah. It was like the neshama of Atzilus speaking to Parei in the lowest part of earth, which is Erva Sa'ara, is the decadent part of Mitzrayim with Parei. That's what he says there. I believe that's what he's referring to. V'yesh neshamas da Atzilus, then there's another level of neshamas of Atzilus, shebabiyah. Then this is one level, they remain at neshamas of Atzilus even when they go to Biy'a. Then there's neshamas da Atzilus shebabiyah. They're neshamas of Atzilus, but now they become residents, so to speak, of Biy'a. And then there's a third level, the neshamas de Biy'a mamish. And there's neshamas that completely, it's not just their so-called temporary residence, or that is their place, Biy'a. So there's Atzilus, there's Biy'a, and then there's something called Atzilus in Biy'a. So the first level is only passing through Biy'a. It's like Maiver, passing through. The second is, maybe a good example would be one person moves from one residence to another. But their primary residence is Atzilus, but they're living now in Biy'a. And the third level is that their primary residence is Biy'a. Just using that as some words of explanation. V'sheiresh kulam hu b'Atzilus. The root of all of them is in Atzilus. All neshamas are rooted in Atzilus. The question is only, how much do they retain? How much do they assume when they go into Biy'a? You could have a great person who comes and travels through this world, but he never assumes the properties. He doesn't become assimilated to the ways and the affairs of this world. The im kain. Now, based on this, kamoy kain b'chol neshama yesh b'chinas elu kamei ibur bebeten ha'ein b'chinas malchus. Why is this important to say they're all rooted in Atzilus? Because if you don't say that, then you could say there are neshamas that don't relate to Atzilus altogether. But remember, everything began in the mother's womb. in this case in Malchus of Atzilus. All the children are born from there. The only difference is some of them retain the Atzilus personality in a full sense, some in a partial way, and some become, as I said, permanent residents of Biy'a. So therefore, all neshamas, there's these levels. K'moshe b'chinas ibur, b'bet na'im b'chinas malchus. How the neshama is still in a state of gestation or pregnancy in the mother's womb, in this case in malchus. I'm just skipping the parentheses for a moment, just for clarity in the flow. U'k'moshe hein, 3-line parentheses. U'k'moshe hein b'chinas leida b'atzilus. And the next state would be how they're born in Atzilus. And then, U'k'moshe boim b'atzilus sheb'Biy'a. And then they come from Atzilus into Biy'a. And then the final level that he spoke about, U'b'chinas Biy'a, where they become permanent residents of Biy'a, the way I explained. So basically 2 things. The highest level neshamas travel through Biy'a even if they don't retain that personality. The lowest level of neshamas Biy'a are also rooted in Ibur, in Malchus of Atzilus. But now they've come into Biy'a and that becomes their location. So all souls, no matter what level, all originate in Malchus of Atzilus, but they don't all retain that personality of Atzilus. Again, any questions? Now I'll go back to the parentheses and learn that. So now in the parentheses, he says like this. Because based on this seems like a very general picture of how neshamas evolve and become entities. But the fact of the matter is, if someone were to ask, are there times that we can access more this level of ibur, of Atzilus, and more than other times of the year? And the answer is yes. He says, "Who b'shmini atzeres?" Shmini atzeres. So Kabbalistic, the Kabbalah teaches Shmini atzeres. If Rosh Hashanah is the moment of conception, and then come the 10 days of Tshuva and Yom Kippur, Shmini atzeres, it says, is that Shehu Klitas Ha'oyer V'Hashefa B'Bchinas Malchus. So in the stages of, let's just talk about first in a human conception. The seed fertilizes the egg. So there's a conception. This begins the pregnancy process. But the seed needs to settle in, because you could have the seed there and it doesn't settle in, and ultimately the pregnancy will end or not even begin. So it says in Shmini Atzeres, it's called klita. Klita it means it settles in. Klita is the word like absorbed. Atzeres, in some places, to translate, why is it called Shmini Atzeres? It absorbs. So the egg is absorbing the seed. In Ruchnius, that is the stage where you know for sure that the pregnancy is beginning to develop. So Klita Sa'er, the energy, Vashefa, has settled into Malchus. Remember, Malchus is the womb. What is that in Avodah? Shmini Atzeres comes at the end of the holidays. So after Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, Shezeu Shabitl the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur was a level of bitl, Yom Neroyim. The bitl that we had in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the Be'etzem HaNeshama, in the core soul, Bo B'Bchinas Pnimius, it's now penetrated, and become absorbed in Sheyeh HaBitl Hazeh. So it could remain Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, could remain so-called separate and not be absorbed and not become part of our reality. Shmini Atzeres, that this bittul becomes part of our reality. Who Ayin Beis? We are, but I'm different so auspicious. Shabbos, every neshama gets elevated on Shabbos. The same thing here. Shmini Atzeres, he's describing as being that state of Ibur Bebet Naim, because it's the beginning of the process of internalizing the tremendous energies of Mesiras of Bittul that we experience in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And that's why it says, Tiku b'chedesh shofar b'kesel leyem chagenu, that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur it's still concealed, b'kesel, and then in Sukkot, Yom Chagenu, it gets revealed through joy, but particularly the end of Sukkot, the last day, Shmini Atzeres, where the oil is niklat and gets absorbed and settles in and becomes a primistic experience. So that's just an explanation, Naveda, what that level is that he just described. Interestingly, if you may recall, I feel very strongly that this was written around Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, because you may recall a few pages earlier, 8 pages back, on page 1449 at the bottom, he spoke about a Aser Shemei Tshuva. And I said then, why is he bringing a Aser Shemei Tshuva? And now he's bringing Shmini Atzeres. So it could be that it was being written in that period in time. It could also be the Rebbe Rasha was preparing that if he would had the opportunity to go back and turn this discourse into specific Maimorim that were delivered, that it could be these were the pieces that would have become the beginning and end of the discourse that talks about whether Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Aser Shemei Tshuva, Shmini Atzeres. Just a speculation. Can't say for sure, because we have no way of knowing when exactly did he write this. But I don't know, for some reason, that's what I feel. Okay, a lot so far to process here. Should we continue? Anybody wants to ask anything? Anything needs clarification? So now he continues. V'yesh leimer. Now that we're talking these levels, from Atzilus to Leda, from Ibur, pregnancy, to birth, and the birth itself, from Atzilus into Biy'a, and then Biy'a itself, says, Yesh leimer, we can say, Shein hadalad madreges tehera barasa yotzarta. That these are the 4 levels when we say, Neshama shenasata bi tahirahi. It's pure. Ata barasa, you've created it. Ata yotzarta, you've shaped it. He doesn't bring the 4th one, which is nafachta bi. Not sure why he doesn't say that right now, but regardless, let's see how he explains it. The tahirahi, the highest level that you're pure, that purity indicates an innocence, indicates an ayin mamish, total bittul. When it's absorbed, when it's still part of, like an ibur in pregnancy, in the primis hakelim of Atzilus, like it says elsewhere. Well, the fizeh, and if you go with that approach, tzarich leimer, the barosiv hainu b'chinas Beriya shebatzilus. The barosiv is already Beriya within Atzilus. U'kamesha kosa b'geres hakedesh kanal hanal, like we says in Geras hakedesh number section 20 that he mentioned before. U'ke'ein hakelim. V'hakelim em b'chinas Beriya shebatzilus. It's like the kelim, and the kelim are Beriya shebatzilus. That's level 2. V'yetzatev ha'izgalus b'chinas Atzilus shebebiy'a. And the next stage is Yetzatev is already, it's now being shaped, is the izgalus in Atzilus within Biy'a. V'nafachta, this is the 4th level, the b'chinas Biy'a itself. So we have here 4 levels. Ibur, where it's still the child, or in this case the neshama, is part of Atzilus. of the Pnimius HaKelim of Atzilus, specifically the Pnimius HaKelim of Malchus of Atzilus. Then comes the birth. But the birth is not yet in Biy'a. It's in Atzilus itself. That's called the Beriya of Atzilus. That's Ata Barasa. The third is how it manifests Atzilus and Biy'a. Like we said, it becomes a resident of Biy'a, but it's still an Atzilus Dik Neshama. And the fourth, Nefachto, is when it comes already, becomes a permanent resident, so to speak, of Biy'a. The Neshamis Hagvoyes, the ones he spoke about before, Moshe and the Ovis, the great, the loftier, the higher souls, the great souls, who sheyardu lebiyah k'moshe b'atzilus mamish. When they come into Biy'a, it's exactly as they are in Atzilus. Oi, another option you can say, another way of saying it, oi b'bchinas Atzilus sheba Biy'a. So it's either they're mamish like Atzilus, or they're like Atzilus within Biy'a. So now before he didn't say that, the two options. Now he's saying in two ways you can explain, let's say, these higher level neshamas. And now he's going to further explain the next section that is till the end, is all one long parenthesis. He's going to break down further Moshe and the Ovis, Moshe and Avram Avinu. So you could ask, why is he bringing all of this? Well, it's all part of understanding how the neshama descends from Atzilus into Shcheira, in Bnei Yerushalayim, into Shcheirani, into a darkened state all the way below. That's the general picture. But while the Rebbe Rashab is already explaining that, he's giving us examples of different souls and with what levels they're on. So it's an interesting study in that as well. So I'm going to read the parentheses now. The Efshe Yesh Lemer. So now he says Efshe Yesh Lemer. Sometimes he just says Yesh Lemer. You can say, which is also a chiddush and innovation of the Rebbe Rashab. Efshe Yesh Lemer, he's saying it more, maybe you can say. Now we know the Frierdiker Rebbe said, my father's Efshe is for me Vadai. My father's maybe is for me certain. So obviously, as Chassidim, we for sure see it as certain. But the Rebbe Rashab, in his own humility, if you wish, or the way, he didn't want to say definitively, either because it was still developing or whatever the reason is. So there are things that he states as a fact. The Alter Rebbe says something, you're not going to say Yesh Leiman, because Alter Rebbe said it, so that's it, he accepts it. But when he's explaining something, sometimes he'll say Yesh Leimer, sometimes he'll say Nira Leimer. It's less common. And sometimes Efsher. So he says, Efsher Yesh Leimer B'derech. Interesting. B'derech Efsher. Which means he's repeating the word Efsher. Beis Dalet Aleph is generally B'derech Efsher. But then you'd say Yesh Leimer B'derech Efsher. You're saying Efsher Yesh Leimer B'derech Efsher, unless it's a different acronym. Efsher Yesh Leimer B'derech Agav? No. So it's either redundant or he wants to say it twice. Anyway, what is he saying? The Masha Moshe le psik taime begavayu. Avram psik taime. Let's explain this. We learned this earlier on page 1414. Said like this. In the Torah, where it says sometimes Avram, in Parsha Vayera. Then it says by Moshe twice, Moshe. So the Zohar says, and I think also other Chazal say, that by Moshe, there's no psik taima, is one of the trup. It's one of the punctuation marks, which is like think of it like a line that separates between, like not a hyphen, a straight line that separates between two words. So by Moshe it says there's no psik taima. There's no separation between them. By Avram, there's a psik taima. There is a line. What does that indicate? So one indicates there's a separate, they're not exactly the same. Avram, in his root, he's not like the same Avram when he comes down a level. Moshe is exactly the same, which is going to be relevant here, whether the Neshamas retain their Atzilus personality or something shifts. So he says like this. So this is the Efshe Yeshlema B'derech Efshe. That when it says the difference between Moshe and Avram, who, this means, the Nishmas Moshe Yelamato Kamoshe Hu Batzilus Mamash. The soul of Moshe was below, exactly as he was in Atzilus. That's why there's no psik time, there's no line that separates. The Nishmas Avram, on the other hand, the soul of Avram, Lamata, Hoy B'chinas Atzilus Shebe Biy'a. So it's still Atzilus, but it's Atzilus already as it's defined by Biy'a, through the eyes of Biy'a. And that's the psik time. The challenge is here now. So that's a Yeshleim, a B'derech Hefshem. The challenge is that sometimes we talk about Avram, we say he's Merkava of Atzilus. We don't say he's in Biy'a and Atzilus within Biy'a. We say he's the Merkava Techesed of Atzilus. What's a Merkava? A chariot, a vehicle. A seamless vehicle for a Chesed of Atzilus. So he's going to tackle that next. I'll read it quickly, because this will be the last class till next Thursday, because I'm traveling. But I'll read it so we just have it down pat, and then we can go over it again when the next time we learn together. So he says now like this. Well, if Kosav be'idra Rabba, Daf Kuf Lamed Ches Amar Aleph. So an Idra Rabba is a Pasha Zoyar Pasha Nosei, on page 138a. There he says something that even though Avram Psik Taima, Basra Shlim, the second Avram is complete. Says yes, there's a separation, but it's complete. So what does that mean? That means that Avram, even when he comes down to Biy'a, he's complete as he is in Atzilus. So Yitzarech Leimer, says the Rebbe Rashab, the Biridose Lamata, that when Avram came down below, Nase B'chinas Merkava L'Chesed Atzilus. He became a Merkava, a vehicle, a chariot, to Chesed of Atzilus. That's why he's complete. The Hainu Shenisala Nishmose L'Kamoshi B'Atzilus Mamish. So he's saying that he came down to Atzilus Shebebiyah, but then through his Aveda, his neshama was elevated to Atzilus Mamish. That's one way you can explain it. So in other words, the psik timer, Moshe, there's no psik timer, he never came down, basically. Even when he's in Biy'a, he's complete Atzilus. Avram did come down, but then he elevated, the neshama was elevated, it became a Merkava of Atzilus. That's how he would explain why he's called complete. Gam liyaz b'chinas iskalos mamish b'esses sfiras d'Atzilus. Or you could say that Avram also never really entered into Biy'a. He's in the state of Hiskalus Mamish in the 10 spheres of Atzilus, which is an early Kabbalistic work from the time of the Zoyar, called Sefer HaBoyer. Shari Avram Eimed u'Meshamish Bimkemi. Chesed of Atzilus says, Avram has replaced me. Shehichlif Mokem Midas HaChesed. He replaced the attribute of kindness, a chesed, when he came to this world. Because Avram was encompassed, absorbed in the inner container of chesed of Atzilus. And that Zayir, he explains, how did he get to that level? Through the tests. When Hashem tested Avram, Hashem Nisas Avram, 10 tests, that's what caused him to elevate to that level. So I want to clarify what I said. The Oy, I said first Oy is that he's like Moshe. No. I think he's saying either his neshama elevated to Atzilus Mamish, or even more than that, he became Iskalus Mamish. He became Mamish like Atzilus. The Esesvidus, like the Sefer HaBoyer says, that he replaced Chesed of Atzilus, which is more than just a Merkava. A Merkava is a vehicle. Here he actually replaced it. I think that's what he's saying. But this came through Avodah. Avram proved himself. Moshe was a higher neshama who never really manifested in Biy'a, even though he traveled through it. V'zeu shavram kara yira. Remember before we said Avram called Yerushalayim Yira, which meant was Riyah, and full Yirei Law, Yirei Shalom, B'Nisoyin Akedah. When did it happen? When he was tested, the last test, Akedah. We discussed that. And when he bound Yitzhak, that was the final way. That's when he said, so you see from that Avram elevated. Nisoyin also comes from the word nes, which means to elevate. So these tests elevated him to this level of Atzilus Mamish. That's how he explains the distinction between Moshe and Avram in this parentheses. And with that concludes the parentheses on page 1457. And here we will stop. Any questions? Okay. So we'll stop here at the end of the paragraph on page 1457.